obviously the Air Force Base is built in the context of the Cold War. So looking at the Cold War, what kind of early memories do you have about learning about the Cold War, the conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union?
Yeah, really, that covered my whole childhood from first grade, from little bitty, all the way to when I was, even after I graduated from high school. And one of the main memories I have of that, I don't know all the details I should, but I do remember we were scared, and we had a sort of always holding over us that we could be bombed at any moment. And we would even get under our desk and practice drills in first grade. I remember first, second, third grade being under a desk and thinking later as I was older, how would that have helped us? But in the day, that was the thing you had to do. You had to be ready just in case the Russians came to get you.
Well, and as a follow-up to that, so what sort of perceptions did you have of the Soviets, the Russians?
Okay, I always heard Russian all of my life, and I know Soviet Union, but we always said Russians. And I remember thinking that they were communist and that it was scary and that the United States was in a Cold War with them. That meant we really didn't have battles, but there was a chilliness and an aloofness that kept us always watching what they were doing in Europe and what they would do, because we always said that if they ever got a foothold in other places, they would be on us soon. And that was a fear when we were growing up, that something like that could happen.
So you were born in the late 1950s, correct?
57.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in that era, do you remember, you probably have quite a few memories about the Vietnam era.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have, what kind of feelings or perceptions do you have reflecting back upon Vietnam and the battle against the communists there?
Okay. The thing that always stands out to me about the Vietnam War is that there's a lot of mythology, in a way, about the way soldiers were treated when they came back and the way things were. Now, there were protests, and I remember the protests, and I remember the Kent State. I remember all those things. I remember, and just a jumble in my head because I watched the news all the time. And I remember feeling like we shouldn't have been there, that it was a bad thing, because the news kind of gave me that impression that it was not, and it was called a conflict, and it wasn't, but it was a really bad time. And my father-in-law was there, and when he came back, he was a totally different man. And a lot of people I know came back, and they were different. They had seen things and been involved in things that were just terrible for them. And a lot of them came back as alcoholics and had issues. Not all of them. My uncle flew a chopper in the Vietnam War. My Uncle Slug, who lives in Utah now, he flew a chopper, and I remembered that connection, and I always thought he was a hero because that seemed heroic to me. But I remember Johnson and all the people who were against the war, and how Johnson had to kind of compromise, and that's mainly my memory of it.
And you kind of had
and the music.
Right, and music, and you had that experience of things being televised.
Mm-hmm. I mean, every day. I remember one of the biggest memories I have is every night on the news there would be something about how many people were killed in Vietnam and how many people were killed in both, with the Vietnamese and us. And I remember those terrible pictures of the massacre. And I remember the little child running with the napalm. I mean, it was a terrible time, and I remember that war. And I think that's when I began to think, why do we have wars? And what good is this? And it really worried me. That's kind of the idea I had.
Well, and in that era too, you may, I'm going to ask if you have any sort of memories from the Cuban Missile Crisis, because you would have been pretty young, but you.
Well, what year was that?
So 63.
Okay, I would have been in about.
No.
Not quite first grade.
Wait, Cuban Missile Crisis is 62, right?
I think it's something like that. I was a
should know.
toddler,
Yeah.
and it was before I went to school. But I do remember everybody being tense and something bad was happening in Cuba and Kennedy. I remember Kennedy being involved and that, and then I later learned as I was an older person that really the Blytheville Air Force Base was a strategic kind of place